Paula Reid is standing by at the White House to talk about everything that the president just answered questions about there, Paula. And at the very end, we saw you asking the President of the United States about questions as to whether or not the mail was being slowed down in his direction. If he had asked the Postmaster General to do that, the President saying he wants to speed it up. We're learning that the Postal Office, and that was the tail end of your question, Paula, is removing hundreds of mail sorting machines nationwide. What else are you hearing?
That's right, Vlad. The significance of that question was whether the president had encouraged the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, a big Trump donor, a big supporter, whether he had ever encouraged him directly or indirectly to slow the mail ahead of November. Now, interestingly, as you saw in that clip, the president stopped, came back, answered the question, and he insisted that it never happened. And not only had he never done that, he says, in fact, he wants the post office to speed up delivery. But Vlad, as you saw in the follow-up question, how do you speed up delivery if you are reducing the post office's ability to sort and collect mail? We know, according to our reporting, a memo obtained by CBS News, the post office is in the process of removing 671 high-speed mail sorting machines. Now, again, I asked the president there. He didn't answer, but how on earth can you speed up the process if you're removing the machinery that is required to conduct mail sorting, especially as they anticipate potentially an influx of a lot of mail-in ballots? Now, over the weekend on Face the Nation, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, he denied that these sorting machines, that removing this number really has any sort of a significant impact. He also insisted that no additional sorting machines, Vlad, will be removed between now and November. But this bigger question continues to linger over this White House, whether the president is putting any political pressure on the post office to make it harder for mail to be dropped off in a box, to be sorted, and to be delivered in an effort to help his chances of re-election.
Wow. Paula, what else are you hearing about mail collection boxes? Postal Service also telling CBS News that it's postponing some plans to remove those mail collection boxes. What else are you hearing?
Well, Vlad, I think most people, they probably don't visit those little blue boxes as often as they did when they were younger. I know I don't, but occasionally you do need to find one of those boxes. And in a statement Sunday, the Postal Service said it was planning to remove some of those mailboxes. They said that this removal was routine and it was related to a decline in mail volumes. But they said after customer complaints for a period of 90 days, they're going to stop this practice. But again, Vlad, the issue that we have is that the president has come out and directly and indirectly suggested that he does not want the Postal Service to operate efficiently. He does not necessarily want folks to be able to cast their ballot through the mail successfully. And it appears that the Postmaster General is undertaking some policy changes at the post office that may, in the post office's words, may make it difficult for some ballots to get cast unless people really send them in extra early. So even if they say this is just routine, moving of these mailboxes, most of us don't use them as much as we used to. Again, it's taken in this larger political context, and there are concerns, there are suspicions. So to address those, they're going to put a moratorium on removing some of these boxes for about 90 days.
Democrats are calling for the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, to testify before Congress. And as you know, Paula, protesters demonstrated outside of his home over the weekend. Can you explain to our viewers DeJoy's background and his relationship with President Trump?
As I said before, Vlad, this is a significant donor to President Trump. Louis DeJoy is a very successful businessman, big Republican donor, and he has a background in logistics. That's how he made a lot of his money. So it seems that if you have an agency that has been plagued by delays, that is losing billions of dollars each year, perhaps someone who has expertise in logistics may be able to help them. But the concern is that because this is someone who has backed the president, that he could potentially be trying to influence the post office in a way that helps the president's chances for re-election. Now, Mr. DeJoy was not appointed by the president. He is selected by the governing board that oversees the post office. Usually not a terribly sexy or controversial position. But of course, Vlad, right now, he's really one of the central characters in the election story right now, because there are a lot of concerns about whether people will be able to receive their ballots, mail their ballots, and if they will arrive where they need to go and be counted.
Paul, as you know, the latest CBS News battleground tracker shows President Trump trailing behind former Vice President Joe Biden, who is expected to officially accept his party's nomination this week at the Democratic National Convention. The president is on the campaign trail this week. What are you hearing from the campaign about what topics he is planning to focus on? As you know, he's given a number of interviews, and I was asking a Republican strategist about this earlier in our broadcast. He's given a number of interviews, and oftentimes he's asked by friendly interviewers like Sean Hannity, what he's planning to do should he be reelected. Should the American voters decide to send him back to the Oval Office. The president often fails to articulate what his vision for another 4 years would look like. So what topics are you hearing that he's planning to focus on as he takes to the road?
Well, first of all, Vlad, let me address your very important point there. The president has been asked repeatedly what his platform would be in a second term. We remember 2016 on the campaign trail, he was pretty clear what he stood for in terms of his rhetoric on China, on different trade agreements, even on the courts. But now he just doesn't seem to have as fully formed a plan, or if he does, he's not sharing it. Instead, he uses a lot of those opportunities, a lot of those interviews to just call into question former Vice President Joe Biden's sort of mental capabilities. But he doesn't really dive into any sort of policies. The one thing recently he has been saying specifically he would do if he's reelected is make that payroll tax deferment that he signed about a few weeks ago, that he would make that permanent. Now that's notable, Vlad, because the president can't actually issue tax cuts. Only Congress can actually make a tax deferral a permanent tax cut. So again, the campaign there just not at this point really making it clear what their plan is if the president is reelected. But this week, he is hitting the campaign trail, so we may hear more, him flush out more. He has given some speeches that have been pretty broad about his policy objectives. We'll see. He's hitting the campaign trail this week. He has stops in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Vlad. Seeing, as you noted, the Democratic National Convention is this week. The president does not necessarily want to cede the spotlight. So on Thursday, he is going to visit former Vice President Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, on the same day that the former vice president will formally accept the Democratic nomination for president.
It's an interesting point that you raised, Paula. The president, even in the few times that he's spoken to some of his supporters in smaller settings, you hear a lot of the Trump greatest hits. There's a lot of some of the things that you heard back in 2015, which of course electrified his supporters back then because they were fairly new, coming from somebody who didn't have a political background, this notion of, quote, make America great again. But in recent weeks, we've sort of heard much the same. He's either sought to define Vice President Biden with some kind of a nickname. So far, none of the nicknames that the campaign has lobbed at the former vice president has stuck in the way that some of the nicknames that he used for his opponents, like Lion Ted or Little Marco or, Lock Her Up. We haven't seen anything really sticking to the vice president. And that trifecta of talking about guns and talking about the Bible. I mean, people have heard that before. So it does strike me that they're still grasping at straws. And if you read that reporting from Olivia Nuzzi in New York Magazine this weekend, it does seem as if the campaign is sort of out there. They're spending a lot of money, but they're not really focusing and honing in on a message that can sell people beyond the base, people who are independents who may be attracted by Vice President Biden and Kamala Harris.
You're right. A lot of the messaging is tailored to the base. Second Amendment rights, religious freedom, those are things that matter, certainly to many voters in this country. It's a smaller group, though, and right now, what's so different about 2016, where he really focused on trade deals, on the courts, on China, is that we're, of course, going through really just an unprecedented economic situation as a result of COVID. And if you look at the polls, a lot of people are casting a vote against him, not necessarily for Biden, but against him, largely based on his handling of COVID. And if you really dig into the data, it's interesting because even any advantage that he had based on his pre-COVID economic policies, it's wiped out by how he has handled this pandemic. And what seems to be missing right now is really a strategy going forward on how you're going to reopen schools. We really don't hear that much from his education secretary. None of his executive orders were about education. No real concrete policies on how the country will move forward in this pandemic. Just a lot of promises about how things will get better. But I will say, Vlad, he is coming before reporters. He is answering questions. He did that on Saturday. He did that already today. He may do it again, where the other side, former Vice President Joe Biden and his vice presidential candidate, they're not necessarily doing that. So at least we have the opportunity to ask him about his platform and about his policies going forward.
It's an important point that you make, Paula. The former vice president and Senator Harris should be meeting regularly with reporters and taking questions much the same way that President Trump is doing on a regular basis. Paula Reid for us, as always. So great to talk to you, Paula.
Bye.